Quinnipium. Welcome to our Knowing Nipmuc webinar series. We hope that this collection of educational webinars will allow organizations to know Nipmuc better and to facilitate greater understanding between our cultures. Thank you so much for viewing.
To share some of the knowledge that I have gathered over the years. Most of this comes from the research that I did for my dissertation. I defended that in 2010. So it's a little dated, but the documents are the documents. And there's actually a lot of documentation about the reservation, the Hassanamisco Reservation at present day 80 Brigham Hill Road and the people associated with it. So I'm going to start sharing screen. Does everyone see a greenish slide, Hassanamisco Nipmuc Band Leadership and Governance? Okay, yes. Excellent, thanks. So I will go through this. I apologize in advance. I have had an eye infection. So if my nose gets a little runny and my eyes get a little weepy, just excuse that and we will proceed. I will also stop several times to see if there are any questions. If anybody, wants to jump in or something isn't making sense. I am going to go through some of this information, which is very detailed, rather quickly, because I would like to leave enough time or ensure that we have enough time for questions and conversation. So you can use the chat function. I'll try and monitor that. And like I said, I will also stop several times and just say, are there any questions, and we can jump in. So the way that I understand, sorry, my slides are not advancing. Okay, the way that I understand leadership for our people is that it's always been very much intertwined with land. And in particular, the preservation of what we now call the Hassanamisco Reservation, again, located at present day 80 Brigham Hill Road in Grafton, Massachusetts. That land base dates back to what we would call a printer parcel. It was allotted to Moses Printer during the division of Hassanamisco between English settlers and the Hassanamisco people who were still there. And that allotment in 1727/1728, when the legal processes went on for over a year, became the foundation for now what we understand to be our main parcel, the reservation. The Printer-Arnold-Cisco family held onto this land over the several hundred years. And it's pretty clear that when it became the final parcel of Nipmuc land in 1857, that those preservation efforts very much interconnected with, as I'm saying, or were intertwined with this idea of leadership, because preservation of the land was important for the continuation of Nipmuc people. Again, this is my understanding of the land base and the leadership roles that were directly tied to it. And I'm very much open to how other people, understand this scholarship and these documents and these deeds that I've researched over the years. So here is just, again, at a very high level, but with some details, some history of the reservation parcel, I'll call it, and printer land loss. So what happened in the 1720s, late 1720s, was that Hassanamisco was divided again between the English settlers and the 7 remaining Nipmuc families who were there. The land to the 7 Nipmuc families ended up being a home lot, some meadowland, and some woodland, in addition to some common land that could be used by all of the tribal people who were still there. So Moses Printer, as one of these allottees, had a home lot, which we have a map, which I'm not including in this, but we do have it. It's actually in my dissertation, and I've offered several times, and again offered that I can share that with anyone. I have it in a PDF format. So this map kind of squarely shows this what I saw to be a 100-acre parcel to Moses Printer up in the corner. of this original map from the archives. So I went through the Earl papers, which are at American Antiquarian Society in Worcester, painstakingly, both in the paper format and through microfilm, to look for any documentation of the sale of Moses Printer's land. So either by Moses Printer, now he had passed away by 1728, so the allotment actually shows to his heirs because he had already passed away, or to any of the direct family members. So I was trying to trace this through these Earl papers, and this pretty much documents what I found sold, usually by guardians on behalf of the Indians who were tied to this piece of land or to any of the parcels of Moses Printer. So some of it's a little unclear because, as I said earlier, he had the home lot, which very much appears to be the parcel up on present day 80 or at present day 80 Brigham Hill Road, as well as a woodlot, as well as a meadow, which may or may not have been attached, and as well as some connection to this common land for the Indians. So these are all of the documentations that I found with this kind of undefined time of 1728 to 1756, where there's a lot of question marks. I didn't find any specific sales that were tied to Moses Printer or Moses Printer's heirs. And Zara Cisco Brough, in fact, had found that there was a lot of land loss that went undetected. In other words, the guardians for the Hassanamisco Indians just kind of taking charge of and making transactions of lands that perhaps they shouldn't have been. And when she researched this back in the probably the 1970s, she had calculated that the state probably owed us, I think it was over $1 million at that time. So that's a separate conversation for another time, but there is kind of this undefined era here of almost 30 years, 1728 to 1756. So we kind of don't know what was happening to some of the land. So here are the documents that I found. The bottom line is when we get to the period of 1857, there was clearly a parcel of land that was owned by John Hector and his brother, Harry Arnold. So they were brothers of Lucy Gimby, and I will go through the family genealogy in a minute here. And John Hector sold 5 acres and 43 rods to John Sweeney. This was a key event because what it ended up doing was it sold the parcel, which is pretty much north of the present day reservation where those horses are, and it left the present day 3.5 acre parcel. So this became the point in time, 1857, and with this sale from John Hector to John Sweeney, when what was understood to be kind of the last piece of Hassanamisco Nipmuc land was left. It was the people who were living there. So again, the descendants of Moses Printer, at this time it was Sarah Cisco Arnold, were very, very cognizant that this was happening and that this was the last piece of land and that preservation of this piece of land was paramount. So here I have the total land loss of at least 155 acres if we just add up everything from this slide to this slide. Throughout Grafton, again, some of it is very clearly tied to the parcel that is on present day 80 Brigham Hill Road, and some of it is a little bit more amorphous and might have been tied to the woodlots or to the meadowland or possibly the common land, as I've said. This directly ties, these land sales, as I've been suggesting, directly connects to the occupants of this parcel, right? So let's call it the Printer parcel. So because it was allotted to Moses Printer back in 1727/1728. So here we have the occupants of this land and their lifespans. And I thought this was really important because we can see with the bolded people that key events happened with them, or at least key events that I understand. Again, this is not comprehensive. Just talking about this parcel and the history and the people And all of the details of their lives could in and of itself probably be a 300-page book. But at a very high level, we see, again, Moses Printer, whose lifespan was sometime before 1665. The vital records are not that great for that time period. We know that he passed away right around the time that these allotments were happening, and therefore his home lot allotment was to his heirs right off the bat. Then we have his daughter, Sarah Printer, who married a Lawrence, her lifespan. Patience Lawrence, her daughter, married a Gimby. And then we see the name Gimby mixed in with the family line of Lucy Gimby, who married an Arnold first, who then married a Hector. So she had Harry Arnold from her first marriage, who lived from 1788 to 1851. And she also had John Hector. So John Hector was the person who sold the other piece of land, the 5 acres and 43 rods that we now know was uphill of the present day Hassanamisco Reservation at 80 Brigham Hill Road. So the importance of Lucy Gimby Arnold Hector was that she made a decision, for whatever reason, to construct a 16 by 20 homestead, which is still encompassed within the homestead that we see on the reservation. She did this in 1801. We have had pretty much an archaeology of the building done. It's called the Historic Structures Report. And all of that information that was gathered from that detailed analysis of the structure confirms that that original 16 by 20 part, which is the left-hand piece of the homestead, was around this time period. I confirmed that it was in 1801 when I found the actual document in the Earl papers. And it was someone from town who had built this, writing to the guardians, or the state basically, and saying, I'd like to be reimbursed for the work of constructing this 16 by 20 structure for Lucy Gimby. So we actually do have that very securely dated. I believe that I don't know the rationale, I don't know the reasoning why Lucy Gimby wanted an English style house. Maybe she just wanted to be more comfortable. Maybe it just made sense and she had the resources. There were a lot of land sales happening around this time, including by her. So she was probably thinking, hey, I'd like to have a nicer, more secure, more permanent house. I believe without the construction of that homestead in 1801, we may well have lost the land base under it, what we now know to be our reservation, because that homestead created a permanent fixture on the land that really increased its visibility and created a space that then descendants of the Printer family, which I call the Printer-Arnold-Cisco family, consciously decided to stay in, because they had this homestead. They could stay there on the reservation. So Lucy's son, Harry, stayed on the parcel that became the last 3.5 acres, while the brother, John Hector, as I said, had sold his parcel next door. Sarah Maria Arnold Cisco, who I shortened to say Sarah Arnold Cisco, who lived from 1818 to 1891, was the daughter of Harry. When this, you can see by Harry's death in 1851, when his brother John Hector sold the parcel next door, it was Sarah who was living next door on the present day reservation. And it was through her that there was a conscious preservation of the land that happened. And we can see this in documents where she's writing to people, she's writing to lawyers, she's writing to townspeople, and she's articulating, I'm here on the last piece of land. This white guy next door, John Sweeney, is trying to take over my land. He's trying to use the spring in the back. He's, basically he's intruding. My cow doesn't have any place to graze. And, how am I supposed to basically support myself, my family? And she also articulates that this is for the Hassanamisco Indians. So this is really the first time in the documentation with Sarah Arnold Cisco in like the 1850s and 1860s, where she's saying, this is the last piece of land and we have to preserve it on behalf of the Hassanamisco Indians. So she makes it more than about herself. So I kind of saw that as a really clear indication that there was this looking to the future by this person in 1857 And that there was, as I've said, a very conscious effort to preserve the land that we now understand to be the reservation. Her son was James Lemuel Cisco. We have lots of photos of him in headdress, and in particular around the 1920s during the Algonquian Indian Council time period. And he represented this kind of he represented Nipmuc and Hassanamisco leadership during this pan-Indian time when tribal people were coming together, trying to reassert themselves as Indian people. Passed away in 1931. His daughter, Sarah Cisco Sullivan, was born in the 1880s and died in 1964. She also, through letters that she wrote, which are in the Cisco archive, documented her concern about this land, almost verbatim to what her grandmother, Sarah Arnold Cisco, was saying. If we don't hold on to this land, the white people are going to get it. People are going to steal the land. People are trying to steal the land. I have to get back to the land. She was actually in a nursing home at one time and writing to family members pretty close to 1964 when she passed away. So it's like 1963-ish. And this is her primary concern. How do we hold on to this land? How do we preserve this land? Her daughter, Zara Cisco Brough, was an only child, born in 1919 and passed away in 1988. And I think for those of you who don't know much about her, I actually didn't have the opportunity to know her personally, but heard a lot about her through oral interviews that I did, and really felt like I got to know her through the archive and the documents that she preserved and the letters that she wrote and the legal work that she did to really ensure that this land and the structure and the leadership was preserved. At one point, she wrote a letter to her cousin saying, I was made to know from the time that I was a child that I would have to come back here, that I would have to come and live on this land to preserve it. So she understood that connection going back to being a printer or a member of the Printer-Arnold-Cisco line, that it was her responsibility to preserve this land. So I want to stop there. This is kind of just like, again, a big overview and a review of what I just talked about, but I want to see if anybody has any questions at this point about the kind of detailed information that I've shared about the place and the family that live there, consciously chose to live there and preserve this land base. Are there any questions in the chat at all? I can't really see it.
No questions in the chat.
I'll keep going and then we'll have plenty of time, I think, at the end for conversation and questions. So again, how I've kind of understood this, kind of quasi-theoretically, is that Moses Prentice parcel transformed from what I called in my dissertation a domestic landscape beginning in the 1727, 1728 allotment to around 1860. We could technically say 1857. And when John Hector sold his parcel and Harry Arnold's parcel, occupied by his daughter, Sarah Arnold Cisco, became that 3.5 acre parcel that is now at 80 Brigham Hill Road in Grafton. Again, Lucy Gimby, this being a very pivotal moment, her decision to construct the original 16 by 20 homestead in 1801 created a permanent fixture on the land that I firmly believe contributed towards the preservation of that land. We do have an ongoing, I won't say how many years because it's a bit embarrassing, but an ongoing effort to restore the homestead that's on the reservation. Always looking for volunteers. There's annual maintenance that has to happen. So reach out to me directly and I will put my personal email in the chat later so you can reach out to me, but that is an ongoing project and an important one. It's on in 2011, we got it on the National Register of Historic Places. So that was certainly an accomplishment. And again, this very important and pivotal moment of 1857 with what I call the John Hector sale, left the present 3.5 acre parcel. And Harry Arnold's daughter next door, Sarah Arnold Cisco, understanding that preservation of this land for the Hassanamisco Indians was important. A few other things I wanted to share, just, these are just a few of many, many pictures and documents that we have that talk about the reservation and this place and this homestead and all of the things that have happened. So here we have a moment in time during that pan-Indian movement of the National Algonquian Indian Council that I mentioned. There are Mohegan people here, there are Narragansett people here, there are Cisco people, or Nipmuc, Hassanamisco, and Cisco family members here. And from the documentation that we see, these types of gatherings and some form of, powwow, tribal gathering, might have started as council meetings. I don't know if we'll ever really know how they were originally conceived, but we think that these started in the late 1800s, if not earlier. By 1925, we know that these types of gatherings happened. We have actually a ticket, again, in the Cisco archive, of a clam bake that was held here. We know that there were like club type gatherings where tribal, just Nipmuc tribal people were gathering and we're talking about things, like how do we think about being Indian in this time, and they were having dinners and meals. So all of this is documented. So this again is just one piece of documentation of the types of gatherings that have happened at 80 Brigham Hill Road. I put this at about circa 1925 because this was kind of the height of the National Algonquian Indian Council. We see Lemuel Cisco, James Lemuel Cisco over to the left. People were wearing these kind of Western style headdresses, which was very common for that period, although not necessarily Eastern or appropriate, but they were very much trying to signify like we are Indian and we are still here. And we know that this was before 1931 because that's when James Lemuel Cisco passed away. And actually with the homestead, if you look at it, this is also one of the photos among many that we use to document the history of the homestead as it changed over time. Everything from the placement of chimneys to whether or not there are windows on the end side. And you can see like the windows and a door in on the homestead behind that crowd. So there's a lot happening in this photo, including the homestead. So that original 16 by 20 structure constructed by Lucy Gimby in 1801 that I previously referenced is from about that chimney over to the left. And if you look at other pictures of the homestead, including one from around circa 1900, you can actually see a ridge in the roof line that exists that very much demarcates that original 16 by 20 structure over on the left. We also have lots of documentation of, external recognition of the reservation. So it clearly existed prior to the 1920s in, I call them adjacent deeds, but what they really are deeds for adjacent properties abutting up to the reservation. So I couldn't actually research the history of the reservation itself because there is no deed on it, right? It has never changed hands. It has always been in the hands of Nipmuc people since prior to the quote allotment to Moses Printer. So what I had to research were all of the parcels around the reservation. And what I found was around 1900, the deeds for the parcels that now abut the reservation started referencing up to the Indian reservation. They started using this phrase of that 3.5 acres being referenced as the Indian reservation. So we see that, around 1900, in the early 20th century. And then by 1930, there's clearly external recognition by the state who decided to erect this plaque, which has been, what's the word I'm trying to think about? Renewed or refurbished and placed back in it's right in front of the reservation at 80 Brigham Hill Road. So this was originally placed there in 1930 by the Massachusetts Bay Colony Tercentenary Commission in acknowledgement of 300 years of Massachusetts Bay. So you probably, if you've ever been to the reservation, you've all seen this. It is erroneously, though, referencing 4.5 acres. I don't know where they got that. Everything else indicates that it's 3.5 acres that's there. So I'd like to tie in this discussion of land to what I would reference as the chain of formal leadership at Hassanamisco. As I said early on, I see leadership and the preservation of land as very much connected for our tribe. So I'm starting with Sarah Arnold Cisco, because as I mentioned, when in 1857, when John Hector sold the parcel next door or uphill of the present day reservation, she was very, very clear in acknowledging that this was the last piece of land. She was a Hassanamisco Indian, that it was the last piece of Hassanamisco Indian land and that it needed to be preserved. So she was very much focused on that in her lifetime. Her son, James Lemuel Cisco, stayed there. He was recognized as chief during his lifetime. He wore that fancy headdress, and he very much in public presented himself as a leader of the Hassanamisco Indians. He hosted these gatherings. As usual, though, it's often the women, not so behind the scenes, who are doing a lot of this work. So even during his lifetime, his daughter, Zara Cisco Sullivan, had really, both formally and informally, I would say, taken the reins of leadership. And she continued this leadership role, as well as a very, very conscious effort on land preservation. I had mentioned earlier, she was the one who, when she was in a nursing home late in the 60s, was writing letters to families saying, have to get back there, because if I don't, they're going to take the land. So there was always in this family a very conscious understanding that if the land wasn't occupied, if the land wasn't used, if the land wasn't recognized, that we might lose it as a tribe. Her daughter, Zara Cisco Brough, who was known as Princess Whiteflower, clearly continued the leadership. I talked about her as consciously putting in writing, in letters to cousins, that she was always made to understand that she would need to come back and take care of, her tribe, her people, and the preservation of the land. She had a process, from everything that I've heard or understand from talking with elders, some of them now passed away, that being an only child and understanding that, the Cisco family, so Sarah had a brother, Horace, and there were still family members in the DC area. Michelle Cisco Titi being Horace's daughter, that the family was becoming more dispersed and that they might not assume the same responsibility that Zara had to come back and to live at the reservation and to ensure its preservation into the future. So from everything that I've seen, it was during Zara's lifetime, again, 1919 to 1988, that she started to broaden the number of families that were involved, what people have referred to and what I understand to be her inner circle of people, of trusted, tribal members, people that she saw stepping up, doing the work, assuming real leadership roles. And there was a process where she had a list, and we've actually, seen this document where she forwarded names of people that she felt could be trusted to continue the leadership. The process was that it went before a wider body, a council of elders, and Walter Vickers, chief Natachman, was chosen by this process. Normally, people would stay in leadership until they passed away. Walter, for various reasons, chose to resign his leadership. He followed the same process that he came to understand would be the right and the fair process for our people. And he forwarded names to an elders council, and Cheryl Tony Holly was chosen by the elders through this same process that had been instituted, from everything I understand, by Zara. I don't think it would have been instituted earlier, say, for example, by James Lemuel Cisco or Sarah Cisco Sullivan, because they still had family members. And Zara clearly articulated that she was made to understand that she needed to come back and kind of serve in this role of leadership. So everything that I've understand that's been told to me and that I've seen in the documents in the Cisco family archive is that this has been the formal chain of leadership going back to Sarah Arnold Cisco. I choose Sarah Arnold Cisco because again, that's that point in 1857 where she made that conscious effort to preserve that land base. Also during Zara's lifetime, what was important was that she understood that she wasn't going to be around forever. She came back, I believe, in 1959. And her mom, so this is a document in the archive from December of 1961. Sarah Cisco Sullivan, Zara's mother, passed away in 1964. And what we see here by Zara is the establishment of somebody's drawing on Deborah Siliker is drawing. Anyway, I'll just continue and I'm almost done. But she established this Hassanamisco Reservation Foundation. What she tried to do was to establish a legal process to ensure and clarify that both the use, the preservation, and the stewardship of the Hassanamisco Reservation, and also access by and for Nipmuc people into the future, as well as the heirship rights. Detailing out in Article 3, Section B, that it was the Cisco family. And I actually printed off this document today and can read this to you. So in Section B, she says the Cisco family heirship rights. So understanding that this went back to Moses Printer, this heirship going back to that original allotment. The Cisco family heirship rights prevail over all, and it is understood that they may maintain and enforce their family rights, except financial matters which do not pertain to their direct property as previously established at this documented date. So here she's clearly articulating and understanding that there is a right and a descendancy to the reservation by the Cisco family going back through the Printer-Arnold-Cisco line. Another question that has been raised is the history of sub-chiefs and kind of where this came from. Again, I don't know that before Zara, there would have been a need for this. I didn't hear that there was a long history of this, but my understanding is that the introduction of Hassanamisco sub-chiefs began in the lifetime of Zara Cisco Brough. Again, I think because she was very conscious that she was an only child and that the Cisco family was getting smaller and smaller. And all of these other people, when she came back, I mean, Zara was a real mover and a shaker. She was active at the national level. She was involved in the drafting of the criteria for federal acknowledgement in the 70s. She was going to the National Congress on American Indians. I mean, she knew people all across the country, and she was studying leadership. She was looking at what it looked like during the American Indian movement. And she was coming back and she was really trying to ensure that, we had a future, and then we had a place, and then we had a structure. She had so many ideas for us. In the 1970s, she drafted out this vision of what she called a Nipmuc New Town, if we had gotten back that land that Tufts University now has. And she envisioned like a place for everybody, right? Like if somebody's talent was beating, then they could maybe oversee a committee on arts and crafts. And this was all in this Hassanamisco Foundation. In fact, the areas that it was trying to perpetuate were arts and crafts, programs at the reservation, and what she called reservation programs, an Indian museum, which has existed for just about 100 years now, property and real estate development, if not on the reservation, then in a place like Newtown, where we could really kind of have space. And we still have this idea, right, of acquiring land, of having a land base, of having a place for community and engagement. And also it established a scholarship. So she understood all of this, understood that she couldn't do it alone. She had what people had called or referenced an inner circle of people. So Walter Vickers was one of these people. He was recognized by Zara as a sub-chief before he became a chief upon her death. Charlie Vickers, his cousin, who I talked with at length on a number of occasions, was also part of her inner circle and acknowledged as a sub-chief. Buster Richardson was acknowledged as a sub-chief, and perhaps begrudgingly, she also made Wise Owl a sub-chief. And we all kind of know like what that led to. Again, I think She understood that there needed to be shared leadership responsibilities, that this work has to be divided among and across families and individuals who are willing, who have different skills and talents and are willing to step up and do the work. And it also ensured continuation of leadership outside of the Cisco family after her, because she knew that this needed to be considered. One time, Charlie Vickers, he would just kind of come talk to me. We did a formal interview, which was recorded when we were doing research for the federal acknowledgement effort. And he said he remembers Zara pretty close to the end of her life. She had Parkinson's, and she knew, that her time was limited. And she said, "This is yours now. Like, I'm handing this off to you." And she trusted these people to continue this good work for our people. So our understanding is that the sub-chief structure or model is not new, that Zara understood this to be an important way to kind of have different people involved who have demonstrated that they are working, willing to work and do work on behalf of all people, and that they're willing to step up and do the work. So that's actually all I had. And I really hope that that you have some questions, that you might have something to add to this, maybe something an elder in your family told you, or that we can just have a conversation about this. So thank you so much for allowing me to share this information with you. So would love to just kind of open it up now and have conversation.
Hassanamisco, and thank you for watching. All videos are available at the Hassanamisco Nipmuc Band website at www.nitmucband.org. Hassanamisco.